let me.
Oh, it's all right. You're going to have to do that. I accidentally pressed live. We're live. So I think Jonathan Fink has just tried to sort that out, and he's now just dropped off. Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, and Jonathan Fink, who has disappeared from the ether. And we're just discussing then actually how he's had a crazy morning. He's interviewed Ben Hodges. Great for his channel, that. But he's also being targeted by Russian hackers and whatnot as well at the moment. And it's this sad to say that the world we live in and the situation that both Jonathan and I operate in is that we are dealing consistently with news about the war in Ukraine and talking about Russia in often not very complimentary ways. And that has meant that, unfortunately for Jonathan, he has been targeted by Russian hackers. And it's something that we are always, I mean, I've had trolls and whatnot, and the odd phishing attempt by email and whatnot, but it's a dangerous work that we do. I mean, cyber dangerous work that we do. So,
and it's getting quite sophisticated. I mean, I've not really been target of phishing attacks except in a sort of more corporate environment where normally, you know, they'll pretend to be somebody from the company, the CEO, whatever, asking you to click on a link or download a PDF, or they'll be pretending to be a supplier or a client, you know, download this document, this attachment, click on this link. And usually you look at them and go, that just doesn't smell right. So I'm going to delete it. I'm going to tell the sysadmin. If it turns out to be real, we can always fish it out of the junk pile later. So I'm kind of used to that and don't fall for it. In this instance, I had a couple of people, different people contacting me through Twitter. And they had genuine Twitter accounts. Some look like they've been run for quite some time. And these Twitter accounts are full of the sort of product branding and stuff that you'd expect to see a marketing manager, a digital manager, or an affiliate kind of manager do. So you look at it and go, oh, that's quite substantial. Right? That looks interesting. And what they do is they enter into a fairly lengthy conversation about would you be interested in sponsorship, etc. And it's difficult because actually I get quite a few genuine requests for sponsorship. So, and you know, with the channel growing, there's a definite uptick in that. So, you know, I'm not being sort of my suspicions aren't triggered. And what they do is that you have a fairly long debate over a couple of days. They string it out. And then eventually they'll say, okay, well, we need to sign NDA. You've used DocuSign and all this stuff before. And then they'll send you a link, which looks like it's sort of DocuSign, but there's some subtle differences to the domain or whatever, or the domain's slightly spoofed. And you'll go to it and it looks completely compelling and convincing. But normally with DocuSign, you click on it. If you don't have an account, you don't have to download a file. You don't have to download, you know, an exe or an attachment or anything. You're able to sign it, you know, without being logged in. It sounds exactly like this similar kind of thing. And you click on it, it's like, oh, it's not working. But then what it does, and it seems to be, because I had to reinstall a whole bunch of apps, I had to kill a whole load of apps and reboot my machine. It looks like somehow it adds in some code or something to your browser, which then starts downloading exes, which I assume are trying to sort of fish through your hard drive or whatever to find crap to send back. So it's been a fairly sort of scary.
Did you sign that? Did you sign that DocuSign?
I clicked on the exe link. I clicked on the link thinking, oh, I couldn't sign online. So yeah, you just click on it and, you know, it'll download a document, and I can, you know, Adobe document, which you can fill in offline and send it. Because I said, well, you could do that, or you could do this, or you could do that. So it's fairly sophisticated. And yeah, I guess I fell for it. So I've had a couple of days of removing these weird looking files.
Be careful, because Joe Blogs had exactly that. Yeah. He signed the DocuSign, and then he had his whole channel hacked twice and deleted, and it was pretty scary.
Well, they've tried to get into the channel because I've got this notification that and there's been several dozen of these emails come through in the last 2 days. None have come through today, maybe because I cleaned my machine up. So I wonder how, manual it is. I think at this point that's probably automated. They require the little bits of code on your machine, and then they'll try to sort of log in as you. But I've got two-factor authentication switched on, which means that you have to go to your app to verify that it's you, or you won't be able to recover the account. You won't, even if you log into a new machine, you won't be able to log on to your account if it's a new machine, unregistered machine. And so they can't at this point get past that. But it's super scary.
Yeah, and there's every chance that this isn't even Russian, but the Russians will be doing it as well. When I guess with any YouTube channel, when you get to a critical mass, you're going to be attracting scammers who will try and take advantage of you. So absolutely, it's part of the course, unfortunately.
Paid for by because. I mean, it's difficult to tell, isn't it, whether it's scammers or whether it's GRU or whatever. It may be both. It may be like, your scammers can make some money, but they get some instructions of which sites to target, and it's two birds with one stone. So my apologies to my audience. I've just hit the live stream button. Again, one of the problems with having to reinstall everything on my machine and get a VPN in place means that my setup's been very glitchy the last couple of days, so I'm just trying to get through all of that.
Well, I was talking about like whether the GRU are potentially diversifying their portfolio in terms of, let's take on some hackers and scammers to try and get some money in. It's looking a little precarious for the Russians to some degree. Gazprom, which is one of their major kind of cash cows, or at least was, it made a record loss last year, but the hydrocarbons industry is a major cash cow. Gazprom planning a mass layoff in its central office and the St. Petersburg branch, according to Russian media. Allegedly, Russia's biggest corporation will fire almost half of its central apparatus staff. Another confirmation of the troubling outlook for the Russian energy sector this year, says Anton Gerashenko. And then Kiev Insider says Gazprom lays down a hammer, sacking half its highest level staff, thousands of executives and company apparatchiks. I've heard maybe even as much as 2/3 of the staff will go. That's not good news for Russia. There have been lots of indications over the last 3 or 4 days over the weekend that the Russian economy is in something of a bit of trouble, right?
I think it is. I did an episode sort of last night, and it's doing rather well for something, thrown together over a couple of hours. It's got past the sort of 50K, so that's kind of fun. But it's talking about the issues of the Russian economy, and I think Putin's stuck between a rock and a hard place. These sanctions are likely to get worse. They're intensifying, and the indicators are moving slightly, nudging towards Trump probably maintaining or even increasing those sanctions as it becomes clear that he doesn't have the authority and leverage to push Trump into not surrender, but into agreeing to peace. So I don't think that's going to let up. On the other hand, if Putin was to say, okay, the war's over, you've got the fact that inflation isn't going to instantly come down, the economy isn't going to be instantly fixed, sanctions aren't going to be removed for a while.
I have to say that sanctions thing is something that my audience is going to know. I keep banging on about this. My biggest worry is that Trump will release, take off the sanctions to Russia. And I think that's at the moment the boot is firmly on Russia's economic neck at the moment from the world, and that's getting more and more problematic for Russia because the sanctions, the US, you can argue this is 2 years too late, but the US are finally coming on board with some serious sanctions. The hydrocarbons, the energy industry is being sanctioned. Those shadow tankers being sanctioned to a large degree now, as in like huge numbers of these ships are being individually sanctioned. I think Russia is in a spot of bother, and it would be an absolute shame if Trump comes in, who's already indicated he's a light touch for sanctions, doesn't like using them. He said at the Economic Club of New York that he would likely lift them on Russia, and that was hinting at that, and that would be an absolute own goal for the allies of Ukraine.
Absolutely. This would drag the war out for considerably longer because Putin would see his way towards, or at least he'd convince himself that he could achieve some kind of victory and outlast Ukraine. That there is, of course, a risk that might even happen under those circumstances. So, but I think there are conflicting voices in the Trump camp. There are those who are clearly propagandistic, those who are repeating Russian Kremlin talking points, who would love to remove these sanctions and probably get a nice big payday as a result of it. There are others, such as the National Security Secretary, who are saying very different things, which is the pressure needs to be kept up and that actually to bring Russia to the negotiation table, restrictions on long-range use of ATACMS and other American munitions will be lifted entirely. There is perhaps a dawning realization of some people in the Trump team that Putin will not just give in, roll over because Trump asks him to. And then actually the other part of it is that Putin probably at this point cannot dismantle his war machine, primarily focused on Ukraine, but he could, I guess, focus it on other fronts as well. And that's because the entire war economy is geared up to the kind of funds and money he's throwing at it. You have 3 million potential people with military experience or who would be sort of demobbed and go back to their villages. And suddenly the gravy train of income, benefits come to an end. And there's no jobs and no hope for them when they come back and do that. I'm not saying that will result in revolution or organized revolution, but certainly it will not be pretty. There'll be a huge amount of violence and sort of trauma that results from that. But there are people in the elite as well who are milking this war and earning a fortune off it. I think if Putin does come to the negotiating table and the war is frozen, he would have more problems than he even currently has now. So I very unlikely he'll sue for peace at this point. And he delusionally probably believes that he's winning. I think he may well do.
John Oliver here says they've tightened sanctions, but mostly filled loopholes that Russia had found in previous sanctions. But so many get waivers to bypass sanctions, including US oil companies for the longest time. This is a real issue. And this is a real issue. I don't, how political do I get? My views on the Trump administration, Donald Trump, and the present iteration of the GOP, which I think has gone down a MAGA populist course, which is not in line with sort of Reagan republicanism of old. And I think this is becoming more and more obvious, but I think there's so many quid pro quos going on. I think there's so much compromise of the government that it's quite ridiculous at the moment. I think this is a real problem, is that there will be people inside the government, as I'm sure there would have been in the Biden administration, lobbying for there not to be sanctions, right? Which is probably why sanctions haven't taken place so far up until this point in many of these domains, like the energy sector. There'll be some heavy lobbying going on. Unfortunately, we're seeing at the moment that the media tech moguls, your Jeff Bezos, your Mark Zuckerberg, your Elon Musk, are very much genuflecting to the Trump administration, paying them outright money. Just, Trump's inauguration will be so privately funded, there'll be that they don't need to be transparent anymore, and no one knows where that money's coming from, which means no one knows how much compromise, how much lobbying effectively is going on with that money. So with the tech moguls, we know that Meta and that Twitter or X are involved in investigations, government investigations that are ongoing right now. And if they're paying money to Trump, and if Elon Musk has underwritten Trump's campaign to a quarter of the money, then you can bet your bottom dollar that they will not have investigations continuing into them after January the 20th. So that there is just outright corruption here. I mean, this is, you can call it lobbying, I would call it legal, but actually arguably illegal corruption, which is, paying money, getting sanctions or investigations lifted. And you've got to compromise with the government, and this happens with every government all the time, I know. But the level to which this, I think, is going to happen in the next 2 to 4 years is going to be quite frankly frightening. And you've now had, sorry to go on, but Jeff Bezos has given money. He owns Amazon. He owns the Washington Post. He's given $40 million as a to get this Melania Trump documentary that they don't even have the rights over. It's just to show it. She's executive producing. That's a way of him giving, on top of his $1 million, he's always given another $40 million to Trump. And we're now hearing that some people are seem to almost en masse resigning from the Washington Post because they're not being allowed to post certain cartoons and this and that are derogatory of the tech moguls, that are derogatory of Trump. So you've got a compromise of the media system now in line with an autocrat wannabe, and this is starting to look rather worrying for the future of democracy in the US, let alone in Russia, what we're talking about. So on the one hand, we want Trump to keep the feet on the neck of the Russian economy, but on the other hand, we already know he's very susceptible to lobbying around him and lots of money being thrown at him to not do the things that would be beneficial for Ukraine. Sorry for that long diatribe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've had a couple of conversations, including with Ben Hodges earlier today, which is going up on the channel, where we talk about there's a worrying mixture of signals. I think that Trump may well see Russia as an adversary, but Trump and his team may be buying into the Russian conception of the world, which is that it's a world of scarcity. It's a world of dog eat dog, tooth and claw. And it's a world that is rapidly heading towards the concept of large imperial blocks with spheres of influence, i.e., heading backwards to a mashup of the sort of 19th and 20th centuries. And I fear that this highly extractive, quite a primitive mindset may be quite prevalent. And they see dictators talking endlessly about this conception of how the world works and how economics works, which I think a lot of the 20th century in the West has shown that it doesn't have to be that way. You can have global trade and partnership, and you can get the resources you need. You can trade the finished products you need through partnership and through agreements, not through throwing your weight around and the worst case scenario, violence. But unfortunately, I think Trump subscribes to a rather old-fashioned view of this, and it's being reshaped for the 21st century by Dugin and others in the Russian sphere that talk about these large power blocks, such as the Eurasian power bloc, etc., etc. If they buy into this, then the implications are terrifying. They could support Ukraine because if they see Russia as an adversary, then why not? But at the same time, they could look to swallow up Canada, Greenland, and so on, and try to carve up the maritime trade routes and the world's resources. So this is a terrifying thing, and I don't think we should just get sort of sucked in by the lunacy and the sound bites. We need to look at whether there's an actual strategy behind it, and whether that strategy talks to win-win and abundance and the sort of the ideas that underpinned globalization, which is international institutions, or are they talking much more about colonial extractive kind of mindsets? Because if they go for the latter, then we're in for a very bumpy century.
Well, yeah, and I saw just a synopsis of the things that are going on at the moment around the world and the things that are going on internally in the US last night. And on one particular post I was reading on Blue Sky, and someone saying, we're in for an insane decade, basically, where it's all going off. And then you throw in to that concerns with AI, or it's not just all about some of these political situations going on, but you've got climate change, you've got either the benefit of AI, or you can do a SWOT analysis of AI, the strengths and weaknesses, the opportunities and threats of AI. But it's something we're going to have to concern ourselves with on a massive scale, and natural disasters and politics that seems to be ever more divisive, a growing radical right-wing populism around the world, a threat to democracy, and this hegemonic empire building. And I don't know, it's going to be a crazy few years. I think we're going to be quite busy, Jonathan, in our conversations going forward. And actually, just to add to that as well, something I'm particularly worried about in the United States is some of these people who are being selected for positions by the Trump administration. One of them is Pete Hegseth, who is, as Senator Blumenthal said yesterday, is uniquely unqualified to be the head of the DOD. And he said, you put aside his heavy drinking, you put aside his womanizing, you put aside the accusations of sexual abuse, you put aside his inability to run two veterans groups effectively and causing them to make losses, right? So all of those should be invalidating enough. But he said, aside from that, the conversations we've had with Pete Hegseth, he's uniquely unqualified. In other words, like, forget all the controversial stuff. He's just clearly not good enough and doesn't have the ability to do the job of running 3 million people, an organization, 3 million people, and strategically organizing the trajectory of the American military forces. John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, has said that there will be enough votes because the Republicans have a majority, but loads of people are not happy with this. Pentagon's annual budget, a little over 800 billion, exceeds the GDP of Taiwan, Belgium, or Argentina, and it's the largest buyer of fuel, the largest owner of ships, and among the largest employers on the planet. And that is going to be what Pete Hegseth is going to do, who's basically just gone from a Fox anchor to doing this, and there are claims that now people are being intimidated within the Republican caucus there, the Senate Republicans, in order to tick the box to make sure that he does get that position. But there are those people are being forced to do that, even though they know themselves that he is unable to do that job effectively, and it's deeply worrying.
And similar with Tulsi Gabbard, although some people I've spoken to suggest that they know that he's not going to get in. She has a snowball in hell's chance. Well, it's a way of distracting.
There's more news that apparently it has been delayed. So her selection has now been indefinitely delayed, according to MSNBC last night. So just to add that, so hopefully she won't get in because she is way compromised. But sorry to interrupt you.
And you wonder whether there are, you can imagine, I mean, I wish there was a camera on the wall showing us, because I don't think it's all sweetness and light behind the scenes. There will be the kind of immense arguments and shouting matches and struggle over who these people should be. You see a little bit of a window into that with Steve Bannon coming out and basically accusing Musk of being a racist. What, of course, he means is Musk is the wrong type of racist, and he's not a Native American racist. So, yeah, we're not going to go for any of that stuff. But if that's what's appearing on the, in the public sphere, you can only imagine the sort of volcanic arguments that are happening, the screaming matches behind closed doors. Do we want to see that? I mean, I'd pay money to see that.
Yeah, it's probably a good time to mention that we are sort of fundraising for our upcoming, at some point, operational security, at some point soon-ish. Jonathan and I and a group of others will be taking 3 trucks, the trucks that we fundraised for, some of the trucks at least. We'll be taking them into Ukraine. Obviously, there are costs involved in doing that. Either you fundraise those costs for the charity to do that, or we're going to actually be doing that. So those costs involved there, plus also some filming and stuff and things we want to do to speak to people in Ukraine that come associated with costs. So we are fundraising for that at the moment, and it's very kind that some people have already. Javier Alvarez for the trip and coffee fund, safe travels. So thank you very much. Kevin Forst, thank you for your ATP Geopolitics memberships, and Zen Soons as well. That's really kind. So just, did you want to say anything about that?
I was going to say, yes, I've also got a link there. My aim is to get 5K together, and very specific, because I ran an event in 2013. That was one of the largest such events that had been run in Ukraine in the times of full-scale war, and actually it hasn't really been matched since. We had 5 panel discussions with 4 or 5 people on each panel, filmed it all. We had a 5-person film crew, and recorded it all in a bunker. Now, that was a bargain, given that we had a film crew and they also edited the footage for us, created a little promo. We had the venue, the meals, and all this kind of stuff. We couldn't pay any of the speakers or pay their travel or accommodation. But we were able to sort of, arrange stuff through friends, acquaintances, and so on. That event cost $3,800, of which we got around 80% back through ticket sales. We're doing something even more ambitious this time. We're going to do 2 events. One in Lviv, one in Kiev, but we're also going to get a podcasting studio for a day in each city and then rack the guests up so that we have, it's not going to be all live stream, but we're going to record tons and tons of material. Plus, in the center of Kiev, walking around doing stuff. Plus, we got site visits. This is a lot more ambitious. So, and there's a lot less opportunity to gain some of that back through ticket sales. So we're doing a fundraiser for that. And I don't normally, I felt in 2 minds, should I do this? But at the same time, the idea of going out there, doing all this, having the expense, and then getting really stressed about, whether I can foot the bills for all this stuff. I just thought that stress will detract from the quality of the work. And let's ask the audience if they can help out. And we're at 33% of that 5K after just a couple of days. So people have been extraordinarily generous. It's absolutely stunning. And some people we give them £10, some people we give them more. But also to those, and there are trolls on the channel go, here we go, another fundraiser. What people will see. They'll see the money on the screen because there'll be dozens of episodes released during February and the big events and so on. And they'll see that we're traveling around. I mean, you can list out the stuff we need, but there are various expenses we need to cover. And I think, we want to do the very best job we can while staying safe. And that's what the fundraiser is for.
Excellent stuff. So that was Javier Alvarez as one of yours there.
And I put the link, by the way, in the description. I've done it now. I was a bit late to the party, but I've put the Buy Me a Coffee link into the description of this live stream.
And Anthony A there for you as well. So going back to previous discussion, Goose Springsteen, and thank you for this, says Mark Galeotti, that is, has said, and you've spoken to Mark Galeotti, I believe, has said one of the big mistakes made by the West is the punitive sanctions against many oligarchs, forcing them to take their wealth back to Russia or keep their wealth within after February 22. And the problem is with any decision you make is that there's no perfect decision. There will always be negative ramifications to any single decision you make. I mean, every decision is to some degree a dilemma.
I think Goose Springsteen, I love his comments. I love all the comments. This one is a particularly interesting one because, one, he's mentioned Galeotti. And Mark Galeotti is very generous. He's come on the channel a lot. But occasionally when you speak to Ukrainians, he'll say, look, he sees the world through more of a Russian lens than a Ukrainian lens. And, that's an interesting point of discussion. But this is a difficult issue here because Russia does not have oligarchs. Ukraine had oligarchs. Ukraine had oligarchs that genuinely swayed the media, owned media holdings, and could cause the presidency to flip. They actually could change politics. These are real oligarchs with real money and real influence. That they're now vastly diminished, and one of the biggest ones, indeed, Kolomytsky, who was rumored to be the power behind Zelensky, he's been imprisoned on Zelensky's watch. So that's kind of interesting. Real oligarchs and real punitive measures against oligarchs and reducing their power. So Ukraine is a really interesting case here. Does Russia have oligarchs? Are these people able to influence power, change power? No, they cannot. So you have to ask, what is the arrangement here? They've been given a license to steal. They've chosen to take their money to the West, where we have secure institutions, rule of law, and their money is protected and they can spend it on the luxurious things they desire. But do they have any agency within politics at all? No, zilch, none. So what's the state gaining from allowing them license to thieve? The Russian system, and I'm going to do an episode on this, is a system of tenured thievery. You give people the right to farm certain parts of the system. And it's not corruption, it's systemic. So why would you allow these people to take all this money? It's because you have control over them. It's because that when you need to call in favors, they are forced to comply. The minute they cease to be loyal to the regime pushes them out of a window, takes their fortunes, destroys them. So why would we allow these agents of the Kremlin to carry on giving the impression that they're real oligarchs, give the impression that they're just businessmen? No, I think the right thing to do is to chase them all back. Now, we could have done more to seize their funds and their money, but they themselves need to be chased out of our society because they are a form of poison, a form of toxin that has been injected into our political body, and it has contributed to the corruption of our institutions and our people and the blindness of their wealth and their money has really blinded us to what these people actually are. They're agents of the Kremlin, and there's no way we should have tolerated anyone. We probably haven't been nearly as harsh with them. Same goes with the 300 billion of Russian central bank assets. Take it, give it to Ukraine to help Ukraine survive and triumph.
Yeah, I agree. AJ Simon, thank you towards petrol money to get them trucks to Ukraine. Thanks, matey. Really appreciate that.
Petrol and the Kit Kat, if we're allowed to, dip into that. Get the odd Kit Kat.
Kevin Forst, thank you very much. Get those trucks to Ukraine. That's really kind of you. And one of yours here, Jonathan, Maria Hladchuk. Your 2023 event was fabulous. Can't wait to see those next events as well. So that's awesome.
We'll give more details nearer the time, but for security reasons and from our experience last time, we'll come on to this in a minute because we talked about the guys on my channel who missed this, but we talked about the attempt to hack Silicon Curtain. In the last couple of days, I've been spending a lot of time interviewing, but a lot of time also beefing up my security, getting a more robust VPN, making sure that the two-factor authentication is on everything, reinstalling key apps such as all my browsers, which has been a right pain in the ass. Oh my god! And then you go to a website and it's like, oh right, you have to root around and try and find all the passwords and whatnot because but I've been doing that. So there's a concerted attempt to hack. When we do events in 2023, there were not just bots and trolls, but there was a physical attempt by, I would say, agents of Russia to disrupt the event. You had someone purporting to be an independent journalist in the US, someone else in Europe, actually getting in contact with guest speakers at the event and spreading lies about each other and telling them like, well, you don't want to appear at this event because these other guys are there and they're under investigation by the Ukrainian intelligence services. So just trying to disrupt the whole event. In fact, in the end, at the last minute, we lost a third of our nominated speakers. And in the last, I would say, 24 hours before the event itself, we managed to fill all those places again with a whole new bunch of people. So it was last minute kind of chaos. And I also realized that actually you don't want to put people's physical security at risk. So this time round, we're probably not going to live stream the events. We're going to record them. We're not going to publicize the venue except to those who have been interested in getting physical tickets for them. But we are going to make these materials available. So again, it's we don't want to encourage the trolls, and we want to keep everyone safe and secure. So we're doing things slightly differently.
A moral question for you, and this is one that actually Goose Springsteen asked in the last video, but I didn't have time to go through. This is a classic, just to give you the philosophical foundations to this. I often talk about something called the Socrates paradox, which is, when does a sand dune become not a sand dune? And there's no, if you keep taking a grain of sand off it, there's no definable point where it becomes not a sand dune. Like evolution, there's, Homo australopithecus doesn't become the next Homo just like by giving birth to one. It's like, oh, you're a different. Yeah, this is gradual, and we as humans, we put dividing lines there, but they're kind of arbitrary, and it's all fuzzy around those areas. So the question is, like, what is a legitimate target in war? And of course, the fact is that war is a horrific thing that is fairly like amoral, to be honest. And what we try and do is we have, like, the Geneva Convention tries to put nice laws around the more kind of obvious bits. But even for something that might seem as obvious as chemical warfare isn't actually as easy to argue is. So, for example, like, would you prefer to have your head blown off by a mortar round, right? Or to have like 50% skin burns through chemical warfare, but survive? Like, oh, well, actually, like if I could manage the pain, I'd probably go with the skin burns and survive rather than have my head blown off and die. But yet mortars are not illegal, yet chemical warfare is illegal. So therefore, what's the intention? What's the, and then you look at, but it's all very messy. And we often
it's very messy. Yeah. I think we need to divide up to what we're talking about, aren't we? Are we talking about the sort of... Now, I used this word this morning with Ben Hodges, who I was speaking to, and I called it an assassination. He said, that's the wrong word because that has civilian connotations. If Ukraine has taken out members of the Russian armed forces, especially senior members, and especially those who have demonstrably committed war crime, that there is sufficient evidence. And this is exactly what happened recently in Moscow. You'll remember one got taken out by a scooter, another one got taken out in another way. This is entirely within the rules of war. This is entirely legal. And in fact, I've spoken to various military people and they don't think twice. No, I mean, even without the jumping through the hoops and demonstrating this person has committed war crimes, irrespective, any serving member of the armed forces is a legitimate target. So this is an assassination, and it's no difference whether you take them out with an ATACMS or a scooter. It
or
makes
on
no
the
difference.
battlefield. So if someone's running towards you and you shoot them with an assault rifle, you are assassinating that soldier. Like, that's what you're doing. That's war.
We got to get out of making this distinction, because I had a conversation with Ukraine about this. Some of the Russian liberal opposition have made a real thing about this. Oh my goodness, how could they do this? Blah, blah, blah. It's, it goes against all the values of war and the West. No, it doesn't. They obviously haven't read anything about the Second World War. Where we could take out senior Nazis, my God, we did. Of course we did. So and we funded all sorts of partisan units and so on. But when it comes to Daria Dugina, I'm not sure she was the target. I think that was incidental. I don't have a clear answer.
But Alexander Dugin, so just to give people the background here. So Alexander Dugin is an ultra-nationalist philosopher whose thinking underwrites Putin's own thinking. And if you look at his 2020 essay about Ukraine, there's a lot of Alexander Dugin in there. So he is a dangerous person who has advocated for genocide, right? And who is basically giving the philosophical underpinnings to the war, right? So the kind of moral justifications, if you like. Is he a genuine target? Now, he was a target, and he swapped cards with his daughter. His daughter ended up dying. His daughter, I don't think, was a particularly nice person anyway, but that's by the by. So the question is, well, where do you draw the line as to what is a justifiable target outside of the military? So, for example, if we're talking about a politician, if that politician is making is signing a law or some decree that is facilitating the war that itself kills more people, then actually that politician is arguably more effective in generating this war than a single soldier who might run and shoot someone or might not even kill anyone and get shot themselves, right?
Now, Mr. Goose is being confrontational here, and he's trying to generate a debate. I can see what he's doing, but we can't drop into relativist thinking, because on the one hand, you've got Dugin, who he does YouTube, he does this, he does that. But as you say, he's the ideological architect of some of the ideas which no doubt are influencing the resurgence of Russian nationalism. Would it be appropriate to assassinate him outside the context of war? I would say no. You might loathe his point of view, but that's never a solution to people who hold points of view you don't like. This is very different. And why the relativism doesn't hold, Russia has launched an illegal, aggressive war with genocidal characteristics. He is part of that. He has helped instigate it, and he has justified it all the way through. Even that, I would say, does not necessarily make him, an absolutely legal binding target for, in this case, I will use the word assassination. I'm in two minds as to whether that's the right way to go or not, because he's not a specific military combatant and doesn't really come under the standard articles of war. Same with the propagandists. Simonyan's husband's in a coma, and whether it's a piece of dirty propaganda or not by the Ukrainians, I don't know, but there are certain things purporting to be a description of the way he ended up there, and it doesn't sound like it's a pure medical condition. But that may just be a bit of trolling. I don't know about this one, to be honest, but there's a difference between a combatant, between an aggressor, and the victim. We are advocating for the victim, and it's as simple as that. There is that's a false equivalence between, say, us and we're not advocating for Ukraine to colonize Russia. We're advocating for it to retake its sovereign territory and then end the war and defend itself. So it's
that's yeah, absolutely right. So there are two things going on here. One is exactly the distinction you make. We are not advocating for genocide. We're not advocating for invading. We are advocating for just defending a sovereign territory. But then the question is, well, then just if you advocate for something horrible, does that mean you deserve to get assassinated? So you could take this kind of move it to a different context and say, well, someone's advocating for something horrible out here in some kind of political realm, which is, or maybe even someone said online that, oh, I advocate, said something really anti-Semitic. Would that justify someone going around to their house?
I don't think it's justified at all. I'd even extend this to Dugin. I'm in two minds really as to whether assassination is the right way to go. I think it's much better to unsheath the sword of satire, take these people down, destroy their ideas, destroy them as a credible figure. When they become competent, you take them out as a competent. Otherwise, you need to sharpen your arguments against them. And what I think is interesting about the early days of the second Trump presidency is, this is a bit of a tangent here, it's how immediately they're going after satire. Bezos is complying in advance on the Washington Post, and he's putting a moratorium on mocking cartoons of Trump and the administration. And one of the lead cartoonists has left in protest, and I think one of her cartoons was not shown. This mirrors what all authoritarians do, and what Putin did when he came in. He shut down the satire. And I think this is the weapon we should reach for wherever we can, as opposed to the violent alternative.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I mean, I think for someone like Dugin, you are advocating for a genocide or attempted genocide that is taking place at the moment as well. So there is a difference there where your country's at war, and you are then you are facilitating that country be at war and do the horrible things that it's doing. So I think you're entering into some kind of like contract almost with the government in what they are doing, and you are supplying the justification, or at least as far as you see it, the justification for them doing it, and then for doing worse. It's like, we're at war with Ukraine, we should actually be doing even more. They should be completely wiped out. And so I think you can build a case, but it is difficult. These things are murky, muddy waters that you're talking about. As Jonathan was saying, Jeff Bezos' Washington Post editorial board has endorsed Pam Bondi as a qualified and serious pick for Attorney General. Nowhere in the endorsement did they mention she's a former Amazon lobbyist. Interestingly, billionaire control of the media is a threat to democracy. And add on to that, veteran opinion columnist Jennifer Rubin blasted Washington Post while announcing her exit. And this is after they are, as you said, they weren't allowed to produce Bezos didn't allow them to endorse Kamala Harris when they wanted to. And then they stopped a cartoon. Then they stopped another cartoon, I believe, that was denigrating the tech moguls and the tech bros. So she said Bezos bent the knee to Trump. Jeff Bezos and his fellow billionaires accommodate and enable the most acute threat to American democracy, Donald Trump, at a time when a vibrant free press is more essential than ever to our democracies to survive on their capacity to thrive, she wrote. And she's now partnering with former White House ethics czar Norm Eisen to launch a new outlet called The Contrarian. So, interesting times in the media landscape in the US.
And we have to watch this because, as I said on numerous episodes recently, what Putin did is he gave certain oligarchs the impression that they were allowed to live a sort of relatively independent existence, and he used them to buy up the media, to soak up the media, take over it, and start imposing controls. And then he used one oligarch to fight against the others, etc., and made it quite clear what would happen if they didn't comply. Khodorkovsky went to jail. Berezovsky was ejected from the country, and they were given to understand that it could be worse. It could be their lives they're losing, not just part of their fortune or their freedom. So duly, most of the oligarchs complied. We are seeing American tech oligarchs complying in advance. What the, excuse the language, what the fuck is Zuckerberg saying about needing more masculine energy in the workplace? I mean, what the hell is this all about? It's like I don't know. It's like a kindergarten version of Andrew Tate. It's like, what the hell are you talking about, you sad little man?
There was a really great thing on Twitter that I saw, which is Mark Zuckerberg talking about, we need more masculine energy in Meta, and someone saying, yeah, that's all good and well, but the first thing that should go is probably your nan's perm. He says, so this is it. I've just found it actually.
And what would his wife say, who helped
Mark
him
Zuckerberg
build
says
that company?
Yeah. Says he wants more masculine energy to replace feminine energy in the workplace. He should start by shaving off his nan's perm. I thought that was just perfect. Brilliant.
It looks like a mop that's been left out in the sun too long. I mean, what the hell is that?
I'm mainly jealous, but there you go. Just a few more thanks, if I may, Jonathan. Julian Rossiter, 2 full English breakfasts, a little chef en route, if they still exist.
We would do that.
Thanks, Julian.
With mushrooms.
And Maria Hladchuk, again, for the truck convoy for you. So that's really kind. Johnny Christensen for the journey. Thank you. And I'll be getting, talking with Jonathan about this. A fixer and someone to get us around and about as well is going to really help out as well. So that's very kind of all of you. Dimitri Storm as well, with a NAFO 42nd Epistemology Battalion legend.
Epistemology Battalion.
That's my note. Yeah. And Ufa Kiems, one of yours there. So thank you on behalf of Jonathan.
Lots of Danes. I love seeing the Danes come along here.
I
was in Denmark over Christmas. What a wonderful country, and what a they're people who knows what's what.
For sure. Up the Danes. Mark Bisky. So for my channel, they should know Mark and Olena. I've interviewed Mark and Olena several times. I went out to visit Olena's parents in Sinurivka in the Kherson area. Might even be into Mykolaiv Oblast, but anyway, very close to the Dnipro River. And we visited when I was out there last February. And Greg, Terry, and Zhenya, who hopefully we're going to meet when we're out there as well at some point, Jonathan, they have just popped into Olena's parents again and dropped off some Christmas gifts for them. And it was a lovely video. Please go and check that out on the Greg Terry Experience. So Mark Bidsky said, thank you for what you're doing for Ukraine. Be safe in your travels. I can guarantee anyone on the fence about donating that JP is genuine. He's broken bread with our family, close to the front line in Ukraine. This is to keep you in the tea and Kit Kats. Mark and Olena. Mark, you're supremely generous human beings, the pair of you. So thank you very, very much for your incredible kindness all the way from Canada. So thank you.
So yeah, the fixer there, Jonathan, because this is a really good idea. People are like, fixer, what do you need a fixer for? But it's useful to have someone who knows where things are, find their way around, little minibus drives around, because we want to go to places like Superhumans. We want to go to the back to the military cemetery, which I found so moving a year and a half ago. And of course, it's going to be terribly shocking how much that has grown. I predicted, double in size when I was there. Unfortunately, that seems to be the case. There is Babin Yar. There's a place where the executed Renaissance took place. There's lots of places we want to see, we want to film, and we want to be able to get experts on the ground who can tell us a bit about these stories.
Yeah, and so it's just having a Ukrainian, basically, who can speak Ukrainian and drive us around and make sure that we can do all the things we want to do and get to our accommodation and fix things up for us and help out in ways that we need to be helped. So that's a very useful part of the of what we want to be trying to do. So yeah, hopefully we'll have that as well. Just a couple more points here. As ever, what are your thoughts? I'm going to maybe change this question. I don't know quite where it's going from. Again, from Goose Springsteen. The extent to which the war is Putin's or Russia's is often discussed. Much pro-Ukrainian commentary reviews it as a former, e.g. the writing of Jay McGlynn. Yeah, if we were truly, I think you've interviewed Jay McGlynn, have you? Yeah.
A couple of times, yeah.
Of course, Jonathan. Of course, yeah, a couple of times. 7, maybe 12. So if it were truly Russia's war, surely Putin could do mass conscription. I'm not sure about that, but like the idea of mass conscription. What do you think?
I think it's the reverse. I think it's simplistic. It's complicated, and you cannot look at it through the prism of a normal Western country. If it was, as the Second World War was Britain's war, then yes, you go for full conscription, you do all that kind of stuff, and everyone's kind of involved. It's just slightly different. I mean, just because Russia's not that keen to sharpen down the front, especially in the large cities, it doesn't mean they're resisting. It doesn't mean they're not working to help make it happen. And I think we have to look at that. We have to look at that idea of involvement and say, okay, if you're against the war, you need to be actively against the war, or you need to leave and take your money and your skills out of the country. And it's more complex than this. It's, if you are, in principle, you don't like the war, but you're living in Moscow, you've got all your stuff there, your apartment, your family, maybe you're a programmer. And I say this because these are some actual stories I've heard from people I know who are Russians. And I heard them in the last couple of weeks. And this people I'm talking to are against the war. Like, they say the war needs to stop, it's evil, we're against Putin. Then it came onto the subject of some acquaintances of theirs, and I won't say the context or whatever. And they were saying, they know some programmers in Moscow on a fairly decent wage. 5 guesses, 1 guess, in fact, what they're programming. They're programming protocols for drones to spot armored vehicles. And integrating AI with drones. And you've got these guys who are like, no, the war is really, really bad. And I said, yes, but if your friend is morally compromised, you cannot say, like, you're against the war and just living your life. You are programming drones to kill Ukrainians, to perpetuate Putin's regime, and then you're paying your taxes in Moscow. I just came out and said, like, this guy's a competent.
Yeah.
Right?
So people, sadly enough, Jonathan, people have their prices, and their prices are relatively low. Like, morality sadly plays second fiddle to hard cash, and people were. I'm sure there are many of you out there that work in jobs that actually, when you sit down and think about it, you go, really, actually, this industry I work in, this job I'm doing, isn't actually ethically where I'd perfectly be, but actually it pays my wages and blah blah blah. And so you overcome that because, hey, you've got a job and you're getting paid. Well, actually, you can, there are all sorts of different levels of that, whereby I remember I used to work for Enterprise Rent-A-Car after I got back from traveling back in the early 2000s, before I went on to do other things, get into teaching, and so on and so forth. But I did actually get, I started getting more politically knowledgeable and started realizing that these guys were funding the GOP in America, and I was starting to understand American politics a bit. And but in the end, I got out of the job because I actually hated it and it was screwing me over. But actually, how long would I have gone on doing that, knowing what that I didn't particularly like this company? I don't know. And we all have our prices, and I just think that, unfortunately, usually morality plays second fiddle to money, and so it's understandable that a Russian would do that.
It is. I think there's a slight, but this is where you get down to the nitty gritty of where is the line, and the line is very difficult to draw. Are you complicit if you have a car and you fill it with petrol, and that petrol has come from Russian oil, and somehow you're, a portion, if not a small proportion, of what you're spending on fuel is going to Russia? Are you complicit? Are you complicit if you work for an agency that has clients that are still operating in Moscow? That's a situation I found myself in. Are you complicit if you're living in the competent country, in the aggressor country, and you're making code for drones. I would say that that's already crossed the line, and you can make a very clear case that you are part of the war machine directly, not just an indirect participant. But there'll be lots of cases where you sit there and go, oh, are they complicit? Are they not? At this point, it's a tyrannical regime. Anybody who is contributing to the Russian economy is contributing to the war. And I think it's as simple as that. So they are complicit, whether they want the war to stop or not. Whether it's a form of supporting the war. There aren't, Russians say, oh, but there's no opportunity to protest, and there isn't. If you protest, you'll be hauled off to jail. But I think the choice needs to be you either stay and you're complicit, or you leave. And I know it's, people are going to think that's quite harsh, but that's where we are now. This is the place we're at.
These things are difficult. I mean, because how far do you take your morality? This is it moral perfectionism is an interesting topic where, do you become in a seat where you take yourself away from society and you live a frugal lifestyle because, that have no kind of moral impact, but then you can't really do moral good for society? Or do you become a Jane, for example, that sweeps the extreme Jane, that sweeps the road in front of them because they don't want to stand on mini beasts or whatever? How far do we take? We can always be more morally perfect. And so, how many companies do I have to boycott before it just becomes unworkable for me, like in my pursuit of moral perfectionism? So at some point we do have to go, I'm going to take this so far, but if I take it too far, then I'm actually really challenging my ability to live a fulfilled life myself. And I used to, when I was at my height of my ethical consumerism, I used to go into a supermarket and go, well, do I buy organic, seasonal, or local? And I'd be standing in front of a bunch of pears, going like 10 minutes to go, well, what are the air miles on these? Oh, but if they're not, but then there's pesticides, but then have these been, what are the wages of the people that have been, and then by which time I've grown a beard and whatever. So it is
the fruit's
difficult.
Probably gone off by then. You've wasted it.
Exactly. But I like to think I'm an ethical person, and that these days I wouldn't take a job. Even with talking about fundraising for what we do now, I'm not sure I said to you or said to some others who are coming on delivering these trucks with us, I feel uncomfortable fundraising for allowing us to do this. But then, as someone said, well, if someone's got to raise the money for those trucks to get from A to B, because if it wasn't you, then it'd be car for Ukraine having to get those extra funds. And so I'm but I'm always second guessing myself, and I don't want to. I don't want to be a bad human, essentially.
Yeah.
But sometimes, you're right. It's when it's obvious, I'm against this war, but I'm also developing code to blow up Ukrainians. Then you got a problem there.
Yeah, then you're over the line there. But I think Goose Springsteen is again, you cannot look at things as if they're all just relative, and you cannot look at Russia as if it functions in the same way that we do, or even that Ukraine does. They've had generations where they've been radically depoliticized. I know Vlad Vex talks about this a lot. And in the Russian tradition, you can compartmentalize things that are, when you juxtapose them, they make no sense at all. They clash with each other, absolute paradoxes. But you're trained in such a way that you can compartmentalize these into your brain and hold radically differing ideas at the same time and hold them both to be true, which they cannot be, because under the Soviet Union, you had to live, you lived your private life, you lived your public life, and you had to compartmentalize both those things. You could not be the same person in different spheres of your existence. You could not say, write, and even sometimes think the same things. And I think there's a real hangover of that. It's never really kind of quite gone away. That means you can use, the products of science. You can even profess yourself to be, interested in science and so on, and yet you could also hold deeply mystical ideas, which are utterly contradictory. at the same time. I think the Russians are experts at doing this. I've got a guest coming on later in the week who's making these comparisons between Iranian culture and Russian culture. And he says it's interesting that some cultures, and it's not universal, but some cultures who are able to hold these paradoxes. It's not a great thing when it comes to geopolitics, but they're also nations which subscribe to very, profess to like poetry and have big, cultures of poetry which often can be very ambiguous and hold multiple ideas at the same time in language, which is very malleable. I'll explore that further in another conversation, but I think in Russian terms, you have people who are radically depoliticized, so they find it very difficult to think strategically. They live their lives, and I'm a good person, and I'm just doing my thing and supporting my family and writing code for drones. And that person will probably think of themselves as being anti-war or not really a supporter of the war and the regime, and that they're a moral person. That doesn't make any logical sense to us. But I think people, especially who've been brought up in the sort of Russian Soviet sphere, will hold vastly weird and differing ideas in their heads at the same time and justify it to themselves without losing too much sleep over it.
Yeah, absolutely. As much as practically possible. I just to, as we kind of meander towards the end, because I know you've got lots to do today, I've been waiting for essentially what has been happening this week, and I think we are finally seeing this point where Ukraine have scaled up their production of drones and missiles to the point they're now using them at the rates we were waiting for them to use them at. And last night, it appears, was a very widespread attack on Russia. And I realized halfway through talking to you, Jonathan, that I hadn't published my video that I recorded this morning on good time. And because I've had lots of telephone calls and everything, I hadn't realized I hadn't published my video yet. So I've done my hits and losses video for today. Now it's out there. But there were huge strikes last night that were meaningful and that will impact, I think, Russia's ability to continue prosecuting the war. And if Ukraine is able to do that every night, as they seem to have been able to for the last week at least, that we've seen some really significant attacks consistently. If they can do that night after night after night, then Russia might be forced into accepting that actually they're not in as great a position as they might otherwise have been. And January the 20th might come along, and the weeks after that, and if Ukraine can continue doing this, Russia might be feeling like they're a little bit crippled economically and militarily. What are your thoughts on these strikes, and what are your thoughts on whether Ukraine can use these distant strikes to push themselves into a good negotiating position?
I think the negotiation position is a difficult one, because if Putin is delusional and he may not be persuaded to negotiate, even if the reasons that he's been given by his advisors are rational. One even has to wonder whether he'll be getting rational information from his advisors. They may be too scared by it. They may be part of the same informational bubble. So,
oh
yeah, sorry, I just did another little antivirus thing's popped up. Just in relation to the hacking attempt, so that's fun. I'll deal with that in a minute. But no, I think the strikes are important. Ukraine has clearly been gearing up. You don't just suddenly have the capacity to launch these long-range drone strikes and so on. They really, I think, about a year and a half ago, made the decision that they would need to sort of build the pipeline of this sort of technology and this capability. Now we're starting to see it really scale and ramp up. I would say that what we're seeing now is going to become likely a new normal. And yes, it will have an impact. It'll have an impact on Russian production capacity, their ability to, take all that Soviet stock and re-kit it for the war. It'll have an impact on energy, factories, logistics. Yes, I think, Ukraine may be attrited and weakened on the battlefield, but they have long planned and realized the need for this long-range strike capability as a way to survive. And at this point, I think it's not even about necessarily a good negotiation, if such a thing is even possible. It's about pushing the Russians back.
Yeah, I think yeah, as I said in my video earlier today, that it's the easiest way of attriting the Russians without losing any of your own troops. I often talk about how there's these hierarchies of objectives. So the Ukrainians' primary objective is get their territory back, but then under some of these that initial large objective, you get these sub objectives, and some of them might actually be not get this territory back. In other words, we'll give up land because one of our sub objectives here is not lose people. So there's no point having land if we have no people and we have no army, then we can't. So one of our objectives has to be to minimize our own casualties. The Russians don't really have that, but it's interesting there's a difference there. So minimize our casualties whilst also attriting as much as the enemy as possible. And these distance strikes fulfill both of those sub objectives, which is we don't lose our own people by sending rockets and missiles and drones into Russia. They do lose their economic, military industrial capacity, and maybe material and personnel capabilities and capacities. And so this is one way of getting that land back eventually, by not losing our people and making them lose lots. So I think the more missiles and drones that they can produce and send into Russia and send into occupied territories of Ukraine, the better it's going to be for Ukraine. I think that's one of the best things they can militarily do.
I think it will, and it's not really getting any major military response from Russia, despite all the threats, the nuclear threats. So, it's boiling the frog. But I think they just need to turn the temperature up. I think that's what they're doing. It will have an impact. I think Russia is in a poor state. It may not collapse momentarily, but it's all about sort of really the next 3, 6, 9 months, even 12 months. Can Russia stay the course? I kind of suspect it can't unless China sort of fully weighs in and tears the mask off, which I don't think it will. I think China's playing a different strategy. We'll talk about that in a different episode, which is, let Russia exhaust itself. China is as likely to take chunks of a collapsing Russia as it is to support it further. So it's all to play for, as it were, and the Ukrainians are not just that was the wrong phrase to use. They're not playing a game. They're surviving. They're looking to survive and not be annihilated, eradicated out of existence. And I think in some areas they're getting an upper hand, which is good to see.
And it's interesting to see some of the rhetoric. I know that Phillips O'Brien, I haven't read the piece yet. I definitely like to. In the Atlantic, has just written a piece saying that we are fighting in a war. I've said this for ages. In fact, I gave my Stockbridge talk. I gave a talk in North Hampshire about 6 months ago, maybe even more. I can't even remember, where I was saying we are at war. You don't realize it, and these are all the reasons why I can justify the conclusion that we are at war with Russia. He's just written a piece in the Atlantic saying Europe better realize soon that Russia is fighting a war and it involves them. Quote, the inability to describe acts of war as acts of war is part of the culture of distortion and denial regarding the subject of state-sponsored violence. It's really important that. So the idea that the Russians have cut these cables in the Baltic Seas or have cyber attacked hospitals in France and the UK, that is an act of war. The fact that they've gone and attempted to assassinate Sergei Skripal, that is an act of war, is part of the larger concept of war. Over generations, policymakers have created many subclasses of conflict: cold wars, police actions, hybrid wars, cyber wars. Different euphemisms serve different purposes. Putin prefers special military operation because he doesn't want to publicly admit that he's waging a brutal war on Ukrainians. Many in Europe avoid describing Russia's sabotage campaign outside Ukraine as war because they'd rather not have to do anything in response. And I think that is absolutely on point. And I've been talking about this for ages. Like Sweden yesterday said that they are neither at war nor at peace, which is kind of hedging your bets. But at least it's getting towards this acceptance that, you know what, we are involved in war. The King of Sweden, Carl Gustaf, has said in a rare interview, security situation today is much more serious than during the Cold War, and says it's important to support Ukraine and invest in Swedish defense, etc., etc. So I think, the Russian sabotage attempts on undersea cables. Sweden is joining NATO's new defensive maritime mission in the area. Sweden's navy has deployed 3 ships, Coast Guard 4, and the Swedish Air Force to contribute a Saab 340 AEWC. In other words, it looks rather like we're at war, you know. But so do you think, so I guess this is the last point, do you think we need to formally, although you don't want to declare war because that has implications, but do you think we need to publicly kind of accept and scare quotes declare war from like a newspaper point of view? Do you think that would be useful?
I think we need to find a form of words that doesn't openly put ourselves in direct conflict with Russia, because we're not ready. We're not even nearly ready for such a thing. But if Russia's waging this hybrid war on many fronts, including sabotage, then we need to step up. And yeah, at this point, it requires a very serious conversation between our leaders and our populations, because if you think about what Trump's been talking about, it's not to quote Trump in a necessarily positive way, but he's been talking about 5% of GDP, which is extraordinary. It represents a revolution in government spending that goes beyond the Cold War levels. But probably it's been said his team would settle for 3.5%. Still, for Britain to go from 2.5% to 3.5% is not impossible. But I don't think there's been that mindset shift in government. And indeed, think of all the social programs that we cut at 3.5%. Yeah, the pain would be extraordinary on a whole range of social infrastructure projects.
And you could only
we're
do
not even
that
there yet
if you communicated thoroughly to the. And this is my frustration: is that the US of all places, where you've got this partisan division. And half the population doesn't seem to appreciate what Russia is doing. So therefore, they need to be told what Russia is doing. Like I think the US has missed a trick here, and every nation actually. In very clearly, I think Macron did this when he had that half an hour interview on French TV. I don't know, 6 months ago or whatever it was, where he was saying this. But I think all our leaders need to go on TV to say this, and our news sources, mainstream media needs to be telling our population that cyber attack was Russia. Russia have tried this. They've tried to cut these cables here. They are doing this. These are what. And the other thing that I think they missed is telling our populations what the propagandists are saying on national TV, because they are saying things like Anglo-Saxons are to blame for everything. We need to genocide them. We need to, like, if our populations knew what Russia was saying on their own TV stations, knew what they were doing, then we'd have a much better idea of what Russia are and what their intentions are, and then we'd be much more accepting of the idea that we might need to spend more on our defense because we know what's going on more properly.
This is correct. And we're doing this within the bubble. I think a lot of people within the pro-Ukraine bubble are sort of aware of this. We've got lots of episodes now. We've got Julia Davis and others who are interpreting this stuff daily. So, but yeah, I think the full toxicity, you're right, the full toxicity of what the Russian propagandists are saying, and the attitude is not well understood. I mean, I saw this little clip. And it's one of these sort of, Russian guys who goes around, I think it might have been 1422 channel, 1420 channel, and they do it's good work, just trying to understand what normal Russians are sort of saying about stuff. And this phrase really struck me home because this encapsulates, unfortunately, a lot of the problem. And it was an old lady on the streets of Moscow, I think it was, being asked whether Russia might be to blame for shooting down the airliner that happened recently. I don't remember all the details of the country it was in, etc. But it's been said that it was Russian air defense took it down, and she immediately said, "No, we cannot do anything like this. This is all Western propaganda." So immediately, there's anything negative, anything that challenges, immediately it's somebody else's fault. Well,
blasphemy.
Yeah, that's classic sort of stuff. But then she was asked about whether she supports Putin and what she thinks of Putin. And this wasn't someone who's like, yeah, I don't want to be on camera saying anything, or I'm just going to say something and hope they go away. Now, this is someone who was like, absolutely, really doubles down. You could see the passion and the little glint of malice in her eyes. And she was like, no, Putin is everything. Putin is the great leader, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, why do you say that? Because, she said, people fear us again.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know. You know, my life might be utter shit. I might have nothing. I might have lost my son and my nephew and my neighbor, and the streets flooded because there's no one there to fix the heating. And generally, I come home to eat a crust of bread and some moldy cheese or whatever. My life must be maybe complete and utter pants. But I can feel that I'm part of something not just great, an imperial project. People fear us. I contribute towards this entity which strikes terror into the hearts of the rest of the world. Well, it's a psychosis.
And it's a zero-sum game thing. So I was listening to, I can't remember who it was the other day, talking, and they were saying that Russia aren't so much interested in bringing up their own population. So these ordinary people you're talking about that might not have outside toilets and Wi-Fi and whatever in certain areas, and they're not interested in investing in the Russian people. They're interested in denigrating abroad and then selling that back to their own population, because it's a zero-sum game, which is like, if they are doing worse because we've made them do worse, then you are doing better, even though you're not doing better because you're still in just as much crap as you were. But it's the perception of these guys doing worse and how great we are. And we're instilling fear in them, like you were just saying. And that gives some sense of that zero-sum game approach to politics. Last thing to say, just a few thanks. First of all, Da Vinci, sir, buy some groceries again for someone who needs it, will you? It's very kind of you, Da Vinci. It would be nice to do something like that when we were out there, indeed. Christine Vad, one of yours, gifting 5 Silicon Curtain memberships. I like this comment. Thank you, Christine, on behalf of Jonathan there. I like this comment. I would change one word here. Greg says it's not declaring war if you're just acknowledging that war has been declared on you. I would change one word there. I said it's not declaring war if you are just acknowledging that war has been waged upon you. So it's not like Russia have declared war on us, but they are waging war on us. They are involved in doing war on us. And if we acknowledge that, if we declare that they've done that, then it goes some way to giving our populations a much greater sense of understanding. Now, last comment. This is a very kind super sticker from Goose Springsteen, but it's not so much a question, it's just a comment. So I don't know if you've got anything to add. I'll add one thing to this. McCarthyism is often portrayed as mad, but there was Soviet infiltration of Hollywood. After Casablanca, Michael Curtiz made Mission to Moscow, one of the most pro-Stalinist films of all time. Red Star Over Hollywood is a good book on this topic. I don't know what prompted Goose to say this. The only thing I'll add to this, I don't know much about this, but I was watching Elliot Cohen and Edelman talk on a Bulwark CSIS podcast the other day, and they were just talking about what they did over the Christmas holidays, and they've both seen Oppenheimer of late, and they were both quite critical, not of the film and the acting and everything, but actually of the history that was involved. And they were saying actually Oppenheimer was an open communist. They kind of played that down, I think, a bit in the film and said other people around him, but he was more. But actually, they said he was an open communist, so you know there were these there were people who were genuinely communist sympathizers in the US, as of course you would imagine. But I just thought that was an interesting element to add to that. Do you have anything to say about the history of McCarthyism and communism in America?
I mean, you have to look at it and actually, you know, the McCarthy hearings are frighteningly similar to the show trials in Moscow. So I would say now McCarthyism is not a solution. If the problem is communism, and let's acknowledge the problem, then McCarthyism is not the solution to that problem. And in fact, many people who were not even outright communists and certainly weren't agents of Moscow were sucked into what essentially is a kind of witch hunt. So that's not the solution. Just in the way that tackling inequality that leads to a lot of the issues we've got now, tackling the entrenchment of oligarchy, which means that it's much more difficult to solve those problems of inequality. Trump is not the solution to that either. So to acknowledge the problems exist, you do not have to posit an extreme, what is labeled as an antidote to the problem, which is actually going to simply exacerbate those problems and make them, 1,000 times worse. And at the same time, jettison a whole bunch of freedoms and things that actually were beneficial, even in an imperfect society. So no, we have to have open conversations about the problems, but not jump to absolutely nuts solutions that do nothing to solve the problem and do everything to actually digging deeper and exacerbating divisions and problems and making it more difficult for people to speak to each other.
Can I just add something that I think is super scary, and it's something that was touted as due to happen and is apparently starting to happen, part of the Project 2025 remit. And this is exactly what you're kind of talking about. This is terribly worrying. Once you start doing this, it's hard to go back, says Phillips O'Brien. So the incoming Trump team is questioning civil servants at National Security Council about their loyalty. If you're not worried about the state of American politics at the moment, I think you're looking in the wrong places, personally.
I just mentioned this earlier as something he is extremely concerned about. People see that interview going up in a couple of hours. This is thin end of the wedge. This is really not good stuff. And for those who don't quite understand, I mean, I don't know that much about sort of how the US government works, but unlike the UK, where civil servants are permanent and the politicians change, a lot of civil service positions, I think, in the US are political appointees. So it's not unusual to have excuse me, it's not, I've been talking all day, my voice has reached the limit. It's not unusual for thousands of people to sort of change jobs and move on when an administration changes, but asking them about their loyalty to the regime. And one can also imagine they'll be going through people's social media profiles. Have they been critical of Trump? Have they been critical of MAGA? And that may well influence hires. That's a deeply destructive process, because we know in the Russian system, the Soviet system, hiring of toadies, lackeys, loyalists, yes men, it vastly degrades the competency of any governance.
It is truly scary. I mean, it's part of Project 20. I thought it's called Agenda F, but it might not be. Agenda might be the wrong word. But it's part of it is to Schedule F. That's it, Schedule F. So Schedule F is the purging of the government of people who are not loyal to MAGA, basically. So all the civil servants, and then they've got a waiting list of people that have been applying for some time that they're going to replace these people with, and then you will have a government infrastructure that is disadvantages an opposition government trying to get in, because the whole infrastructure of government is pro the incumbency. And it's just this is super undemocratic, and it is not. This is not good news. So there are lots of things going on. We were told, scaremongering about Project 2025. Project 2025 is happening, and it looks like they're going to do a very good job of laying that out and implementing it. And apparently 100 executive orders will be laid out on day one of the Trump presidency, and they said shock and awe. They've literally said expect shock and awe. Honestly, listen to their words. Expect shock and awe. It will happen. It's going to be a bumpy ride, I'll tell you, next few years.
It's already carnage. It's already carnage, and he's not even got in yet. So buckle up.
Buckle up. On that
reminder
note,
for the fundraiser, if you haven't yet done it, jump in, help us to get these trucks across, help us do a ton more than just drive the trucks over to Ukraine. We're doing events, we're doing interviews, we're doing a bunch of filming on the ground. It's going to be extraordinary, and you'll be able to see all the results of that on your screens through February as we edit and broadcast that material. But it all costs, unfortunately, and neither Jonathan and I are oligarchs, alas. So if you can, don't stress yourself. Especially, I have a lot of people on my channel whose average age is above 65. People in their 70s, 80s, 90s. Don't skimp on your fuel bill. But if you are able to afford the price of coffee or something, then it all helps. It's very much appreciated.
Absolutely, and I just back that up. So thank you. Thank you for all of those who have already, and people like Mark Biscuit, Goose Springsteen as well, with very generous contributions. Julian Roster, all the people in the thread who have been, as ever, super generous. Thank you for that. You are all officers and gentlemen and women, and for those who have gifted memberships, Kevin Force, Zenzuns, and people like that, all legends. So thank you. And yes, we may be talking tonight at 9. I don't know if I'm going to be given the green card by my missus again. Occasionally she likes to see me, but then probably realizes soon after that it probably would be better if I was on a live stream. And
we can keep it to an hour probably, but we've got the legendary Operator Starsky on for an hour, maybe. Let's see.
So yeah. So that's 9 o'clock tonight. So check that one out, and we'll hopefully make that work.
Fantastic. And tomorrow I'll be meeting up with Mr. Pekka Kaliniormi, Mr. Vatnik Soup, who's in London. So
awesome.
Something else to look forward to. Yeah.
I mean,
he's around actually. You're not able to come to the event on Saturday. There's an event in London on Saturday, which
that would be great.
Still some tickets.
I would love to go. Yeah. I would love to go, but yes, alas. Okay, well, look, you take care, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Jonathan, stay on the line because we're going to do a little bit more chatting, and we'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips. Slava Ukraini.
Horam Slava.